We're live.
Good evening. Welcome to this second in a series of fiscal year 25 budget hearings hosted by the Boston School Committee and Superintendent Mary Skipper. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I will ask all of my colleagues to unmute and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Because this is a virtual meeting, I will ask Ms. Sullivan to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Alkins? Mr. Cadet Hernandez? Ms. Lima Barbosa?
I think you heard me.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Mehta? Ms. Polanco Garcia?
Present.
Mr. Tran?
Present.
Mr. O'Neill? Ms. Robinson?
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Tonight's session is being shared live on Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. The recording will be available in all of the BPS languages. Tonight's hearing documents are posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee, under the March 4th meeting link. The documents have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The committee is pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdeano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The interpretation feature has been activated. Click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you to everyone who signed up for public comment. Sign up for public comment closed today at 4 p.m. Please make sure that you are signed into Zoom under the same name you used to sign up for public comment. You can use the Zoom tools to rename yourself so that committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. Thank you all for your cooperation. Before we get into the hearing, the superintendent is going to provide a brief update on a recent incident at the Condon K-8 school. Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to all. I just wanted to take a minute at the start to just address what you've probably seen in the media regarding an incident at the Condon School in South Boston. First, I just want to start by saying that the safety and well-being of our students is our #1 priority, always is and will be. This incident is deeply concerning to me. We know it's difficult for the student and the family involved, as well as all students and families at the Condon, and we'll continue to work directly with the impacted family to provide whatever support that they need to feel safe and continue learning in BPS. I want to reassure that as soon as we learned and were made aware of the incident, we took immediate action and we placed staff members involved on leave. Our investigation remains ongoing, and we want to reassure all BPS families that we're working with our entire community to ensure that every student feels safe, secure, and welcome. And I'll continue to keep the committee updated as our investigation goes on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent. Before we move into tonight's budget hearing, I want to briefly review the committee's budget process. On the first Wednesday in February, as outlined in the city charter, the superintendent presented her preliminary fiscal fiscal year 25 budget proposed to the committee. Starting tonight, actually, this is the second one. The committee will hold a series of budget hearings to take a deeper look at the superintendent's budget process. On February 15th, the committee held a budget hearing focused on school budgets. Tonight's hearing is focused on the central budget. The committee will hold the third and final hearing on March 20th at 5 p.m., immediately followed by a regular school committee meeting at 6 p.m. Over the course of the next few weeks, committee members are invited to ask questions and suggest modifications to budget items. The community is also invited to ask questions and provide feedback about the superintendent's recommended budget by offering live written and video testimony. The superintendent and her team will work diligently to respond to the committee members' questions and suggested modifications, as well as clarify areas of concern before presenting a revised budget to the committee on March 20th. As we have in the past, I ask that committee members reserve action on the budget items until we have finished all of the budget hearing presentations, so that any proposed action is taken in the context of the impact on the budget as a whole. And after the superintendent and her team have had an opportunity to provide responses to committee members' questions and incorporate feedback from both committee members and the community in her revised budget that will be presented on March 20th. I will now turn it over to the superintendent and her team for the central budget presentation.
Wonderful.
Excuse me?
Sorry, there was a delay, sorry.
Oh, okay. I'd like to remind everyone to please speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. And again, it's good to see everyone tonight. Tonight's budget presentation, as Chair said, will focus on central offices support for our schools. This is the second FY25 budget hearing before this body. At our last hearing, just as a reminder, back on February 15th, we reviewed the school's budgets. And at that budget hearing, we did a few things. We explained our approach to this year's school budgets. We outlined school-based efficiencies, including classroom consolidations. We mapped out our spending beyond the end of ESSER, and we dove into the implementation of inclusive education at the school level. The FY25 budget is about building the foundation to do the transformational work that we need to do as a district, but have been avoiding for decades. Simply put, we need to improve services by maximizing dollars. We will do this by balancing our investments with efficiencies and offsets that we'll talk about in tonight's presentation. An example of this is what looks like a decrease in bilingual teachers. And I know we've brought this up. We've had this as part of even public comment. While the technical components show it as a $6 million cut or decrease, the reality is more complex. It's a combination of us recoding the positions and how educators are classified in our systems. Updates in the minutes of ESL requirements for our students, changes in the definitions of what an SEI classroom is, and the consolidation of some of our classrooms. And we'll go deeper into this as we get into the budget presentation. So though this looks like major cuts in one part of the budget, it's actually a reclassification of these dollars, and it's reflected in other parts of the budget as supporting inclusive education. As we progress through this year's budget process, we're guided by our commitment to ensuring all students have access to a high-quality student experience. Tonight, you will hear from our interim Chief Financial Officer, David Bloom, who we welcome back after the birth of his son, as well as our 3 deputy superintendents who will speak on how the FY25 central office budget will impact our work collectively. Dr. Ana Tavares, who is our deputy superintendent of Equity, Community, and Family Advancement, Dr. Linda Chen, who's our senior deputy of academics, and Dr. Sam DePina, who's our deputy superintendent of operations. They will all present. As they go through tonight's presentations, each of the deputies will highlight the budget through lines that have a direct impact on students and families. Examples of these would be equity, staffing, academics, transportation, family engagement, and the long-term plan for our school's facilities. As you know, we're moving away from weighted student formula because it no longer adequately supports our schools. As we continue through the reimagining school funding process, we used a zero-based budget approach this year in the interim, similar to what we will ask schools to do. This strategy has allowed us to identify approximately $17 million in cost savings by consolidating positions, reducing program spending, and streamlining services by decreasing budgets that showed patterns of underspending across 3 years. At the same time in Central, we're also planning for the end of federal ESSER, which gave us the flexibility to provide much-needed services to students coming out of the pandemic. As we created this budget, the team used data to identify which programs were working and which programs were underperforming and undersubscribed. This helped us make informed decisions about what was working and what should continue to be funded. Each of our deputies will speak to how they will balance these offsets within their own divisions while using a cross-collaboration in their approach to the work. As a quick reminder, the final budget will be reviewed at an upcoming hearing on Wednesday, March 20th. That hearing will immediately be followed by a school committee meeting, regular meeting, that same evening. The final budget vote is scheduled for Wednesday, March 27th. And at this point, it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to our interim Chief Financial Officer, David Bloom. David?
Thank you, Superintendent Skipper, Chair and members of the school committee and the public for letting me present to you this evening. It's been fun today to get back into the headspace of work in BPS as I've gotten back from welcoming a new member of the class of 2042, which is a crazy thing to say out loud. And I just want to start with a quick note of appreciation to many of my colleagues across BPS who have done tremendous work through the 4 weeks of my absence to be presenting to you what they've presented to you so far and to make all of the materials for tonight. While I am honored by the opportunity to present to you, I do also have to acknowledge many of my colleagues who made these materials tonight. And so I'm excited to be able to join you here to be able to answer some questions and give additional information about our central office budgets. Make sure we're answering all the questions you have. We'll start with a review of some key budget information. It's a little bit repetitive, but it's helpful for those members of the public who are not able to join our previous meetings. We will then dig more deeply into the central office budget, understanding our increased costs, and then also our FY25 funding priorities. As the superintendent has discussed in detail in our prior hearings and again tonight, at the core of our work to make the budget is delivering a high-quality student experience for the students of BPS in all of our schools. We are also thinking about how we build a foundation for the future with this budget through our work in inclusive planning, as well as the physical footprint work and our work to reimagine school funding as we move away from weighted student funding. We were thinking about how BPS can emerge from ESSER and COVID as the district that our kids deserve and the district we need to be. Our budget process moves through several phases. You've been through several of them already through the beginning of our budget season. Tonight, we're focusing on what's in the red box, the central office budget development process. As a quick reminder, as the superintendent mentioned, this is the upcoming schedule. We'll be back in front of this body on March 20th for a budget hearing before the regularly scheduled school committee hearing. In that meeting, we will be reviewing the finalized budget information adjusted from the preliminary budget submitted on February 7th and having an opportunity to ask questions in advance of the vote on Wednesday, March 27th. That is not the end of this process completely, though. In April through June, we meet with the city council to review our budget as a part of the mayor's budget for the city. And in late June, the city council will vote on our total appropriation. More information can be found on our website, and members of the public can submit questions and comments using the QR code on this slide. Now we'll start to dig into a little bit more about what is in our central budget. As we've mentioned in our previous budget hearings, 94% of the BPS budget goes directly to student services, either through direct school expenses, the biggest of which is school budgets, or school services budgeted centrally. These things are primarily things you would think of day to day as things happening either in schools or directly for students, like bus transportation, special education, benefits for our teachers and paraprofessionals, and so on. There are also student services for non-BPS students who are in private special education schools, students who are being bused from outside of the system to come join BPS. And finally, that small 6% is central administration. We are so fortunate to be here presenting an $81 million budget increase that reflects the city's continued commitment to BPS and the students of Boston. In our first two hearings, we discussed the $30 million that went directly to schools, with $20 million focused on inclusive education. Tonight's focus is a deeper dive into the portions of our funding that are budgeted centrally, even if they're experienced directly in schools. This includes operational costs to maintain level service in areas such as transportation, food services, and facilities, funding for programs that were originally funded on ESSER that we are planning to continue when ESSER expires, as well as some one-time charges in areas like UPK and BTU collective bargaining that were temporarily funded on ESSER. To offset some of these increased costs, our central office team has looked deeply across budgets to identify approximately $17 million in efficiencies and reductions to offset the increased costs. As the superintendent mentioned, we are moving as a system towards zero-based budgeting for our central office departments. ESSER gave us some additional budget flexibility in both schools and central to try new things. But with ESSER ending, we need to take new approaches to examining our budget. At the central office, this means having department heads look through their full budget across all funding sources, review how those budgets link to strategy, and prioritize what is most needed for our students and families. The focus through this budget season is to preserve the programming funded on central budgets that is most tied to our school-based priorities. Finally, for a certain set of ESSER positions that we wanted to keep, but didn't make it into our final investment list, we asked departments to identify offsetting reductions with those within their budgets that will allow those programs to continue. So what does that look like? We identified about $17 million in reductions from central office budgets through consolidating vacant positions, reducing overlapping programming and streamlining services between departments, and a deep review of underspending on budget lines from prior years to ensure that we weren't budgeting for items that wouldn't ultimately be spent. We also found $4.6 million of additional offsets to sustain ESSER programming in things like expanded assessment options for multilingual learners, teacher-led professional learning, early college, and other secondary programs. The goal of these reductions was to minimize impact on staff and student experience. So we were able to maintain those high priority initiatives that we've started on ESSER. I'm now going to dive deeper into the increased costs we are seeing as a district. The numbers I'm presenting in this next section reflect the total cost of the increase, but some of them are offset by the reductions I just mentioned. As we move into FY25, there were two main types of cost increases. First were costs that we had temporarily paid using ESSER, and those were sort of two items. In the FY24 budget, we strategically put some of our increasing costs on ESSER. This allowed us to start work early and really dive into some of our important work, such as inclusion planning through BTU collective bargaining. ESSER allowed us to start that work in FY24, even though we knew the money wouldn't be coming in our appropriation until FY25. This is now that money coming forward for both BTU collective bargaining and our universal pre-K expansion. These two costs in this section do not reflect new expenses on those items for FY25, but instead reflect us moving the existing cost for level service onto the general fund from ESSER. Second is the more traditional type of increased costs, like transportation and facilities. And I'm going to walk through those in more detail now. The first one is $11 million for high quality facilities. This fell into three main categories. In facilities maintenance, this includes things like preventative maintenance contracts for HVAC, elevators, electrical systems, fire systems, and plumbing repair across the district. This cost increase reflects the cost of doing business with the vendors and suppliers who provide these services to us. We also had about $3 million from ESSER for increased air quality measures, such as AC filters and portable unit filters and replacement maintenance that needs to be continued ongoing for that AC program to continue, and that's a part of this 5.9. The second item here is alterations and repairs. We've had a high volume increase in work orders as a result of the facilities condition assessment report. And there's also an increased cost of continuing to service repairs at our buildings. This covers things like replacing flooring, ceilings, and exterior doors. Finally, there's what we call our building services. This includes things like cleaning and sanitation supplies, which are getting more expensive, as well as the cost for leasing space in both new buildings and modulars, especially as we need temporary and transition spaces as we're moving through the Green New Deal. In transportation, items also fell into three main categories. The largest is our yellow bus operator, in this case, Transdev. Our contract with Transdev included a 3% increase in the fixed management fee. There are also variable costs, including unionized staff wages and benefits, fuel, and parts for maintenance that pass through the yellow bus operator contract and are expected to see continued increases. As Transdev continues to hire and retain effective drivers, mechanics, and safety employees, we are seeing that increased cost pass through to us. The second largest category here is private transportation for students in transition. We provide transportation for students experiencing homelessness who are involved with DCF and some out-of-district special education students. This is transportation that we're required to do by law, even if the student is no longer attending BPS in some cases. And so far, we've seen about 150 more students that were requiring this sort of transportation this year compared to the prior year. We anticipate continued increases for next year. Finally, our leases for our bus yards are up, and we have to reissue new leases. Right, as we are negotiating the cost of those leases, there are some increases over the previous lease. In addition, I would like to mention our transportation team has identified about $5 million of reductions in efficiencies to help offset these costs. This is an example of the type of reduction or efficiency that I was discussing on the previous 17 million. So In this example, they had $12 million of increased costs. They identified $5 million of efficiencies. And so the total net cost is lower than 12 million. The next area of increased cost is food services. Our food service costs are projected to be about $4 million over what we had budgeted currently for fiscal year 25. The costs we are seeing per meal are rising faster than the federal reimbursement rate. And we are also seeing some increased costs for equipment repair and replacement. It is important to note that these cost increases reflect a relatively small portion of our total food service budget, the majority of which is reimbursed by the USDA. And we do not know what those USDA rates will be for next year until the summer. So this may need to be adjusted as we get those rates. And we will come back to you with an update on this in December in our typical timeline. The last two areas are a little bit different than the previous three operational ones that we're used to. For extended learning time, we had about $8 million of charges for extended learning that we've paid for a variety of funding sources over the past few years. For FY25, these costs do need to move onto the general fund budget. It is not an $8 million increase from prior years, but that is the total amount that needed to be budgeted on the general fund that had been budgeted on grants over the past several years. And finally, there's a variety of smaller items that we won't be going through in detail today that total about $9 million that are generally, you can think of as inflationary costs for the rest of our system. You can imagine the subscription costs for some of our educational platforms, for example, are getting more expensive each year. It also costs more for our IT network services, emergency management positions, and other things like that. I will now hand it over to Dr. Devaris to begin our deeper dive into our FY25 funding priorities.
Thank you, David. Chair Robinson and school committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to share the ways in which we align our district priorities to our funding allocations. The work of my division is intertwined with the work led by Dr. Chen and Dr. DePina. Whether we are talking about improving our facilities or strengthening classroom instruction, it is all in service to closing the opportunity gaps for our students. In particular, our students disadvantaged by systems, including but not exclusive to our students with disabilities, our multilingual students, and Black and Latino, Latina, and Latinx students. I'm excited to kick off this part of the presentation. You will see that while Dr. Chen and Dr. DePina and I will separately share the work we lead, we do not see the work as separate, nor do we implement our work separately. Excuse me. Each of us has a portfolio of work that is connected to the other. For example, the Acceleration Academies could not happen if we didn't have the educators to teach and the transportation to get our students to their site. I know I speak for the superintendent, Dr. Chen, and Dr. DePina when I say that families and communities are our most important partners. We acknowledge the critical role families play as the first teachers to our students. They are the lever to our students' academic success. Our goal, along with our teams, is to ensure our families always remain central to our funding decisions. Excuse me. I will share with you tonight some of the ways the fiscal 25 budget aligns to our work and investments. For many of our families, our Welcome Services team are the first people they meet at BPS. Our $1.1 million investment allows us to consistently provide personalized services to our families and ensures accessibility to using culturally and linguistically responsive practices. Excuse me one second. Access to information for families is always the goal. We know this is an area of growth for us, but something we're deeply committed to. For example, With the leadership of Chief Sanchez and the Family School Engagement Practice Team, 97% of our schools submitted their school site council's elected members, compared to 78% last spring, which includes teachers and families as a shared decision-making body for their schools. We still have a ways to go to ensure the school site councils are functioning at their full capacity across all of our schools. However, we're structurally stronger now than last year. Additionally, providing robust extended learning opportunities for all of our students, our acceleration academies, intensive tutoring opportunities, and summer learning, to name a few. Furthermore, an investment in the BPS helpline led by Chief Ortiz and our constituent services team for better and more immediate responsiveness to our families, while we invest in our staff to ensure our families are supported in their preferred language. We invested and expanded with $416,000 to sustain the 6 helpline positions. Before ESSER, we had approximately $100,000 allocated to the helpline, and we expanded and plan to sustain this critical resource for our families. On average, every week, the helpline manages approximately 670 requests by phone, email, or in person. It has made a dramatic difference for our families to have one entry point and also a system in place to track requests, even more so in their preferred language. A few examples of how we will continue investing, including opportunities for collaboration with my colleagues, Dr. DePina and Dr. Chen, and their teams, are as follows. These are the critical investments that are based on collaboration. Working closely with Assistant Superintendent Dr. Yasmin Gay, leading our Opportunity Gap Department, and Assistant Superintendent Becky Schuster, leading the Office of Equity. Their work and support informs how we develop and implement these initiatives. Additionally, professional development for all of our family liaisons in partnership with both Dr. Chen's team in academics and Dr. DePina's team in operations, and the entire division of Equity, Family, and Community Advancement, focusing the continual growth of our teams and our district with investments that tap into the expertise that already exists within our organization.
Excuse me a second, please slow down.
Thank you. As Superintendent Skipper shared previously, over the past year, we have supported over 1,500 recently arrived migrant families and their children, including our most recent arrivals from the Melnia Cass Recreation Center. With unprecedented efficiency and care, 80 students were welcomed into our schools within days of their arrival. Within days of their arrival. Led by the unstoppable Chief Magali Sanchez and her dedicated team, supported by the innovative Senior Director Sonia Gomez Banray, and the support and collaboration of our dedicated colleagues across all departments. Again, collaboration across our organization sustains our goals to provide access to schools to ensure our students thrive. Our colleagues collaborated to make sure the recently arrived migrant families were supported with the necessities many of us take for granted, like shelter, food, and clothing, so their students were prepared to learn and enter their classrooms. I invite school committee members to stop by Bowling and the donation distribution center we created, led by the tireless Francisca Borders. Another example is thanks to Chief Miriam Ortiz and the community engagement team, and again, supported by all departments across our organization, allowing our superintendent to continue engaging with community members across the city, focusing on our community partners that support our schools and students to continue building bridges to more efficiently support our students' learning. Again, sharing our resources with one another directly benefits our students. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Chen.
Thank you, Dr. Taveras. Good evening, Chair, school committee members, and the public. I'm privileged to present alongside my colleagues and on behalf of the academics team that includes the following divisions: Schools and Accountability, led by Dr. Drew Eckelson; Multilingual and Multicultural Education, led by Joel Gamer; Teaching and Learning, led by Leslie Miller; and Specialized Services, led by Kay Seal. As the superintendent shared, our teams have worked diligently to prioritize the needs of schools while also working across divisions to ensure we are able to provide the infrastructure and supports to ensure academic priorities are met. Across teams, we reviewed our ESSER expenditures that were largely focused on providing additional resources for students and to build capacity within the system for educators and leaders, piloting new programs to best serve families, or create data or assessment tools to better service our students. On this slide, I'll highlight areas of planning beyond ESSER through investments, as well as offsets we made to ensure the priorities resourced with ESSER funding continued that were most needed. The funding areas delineated on this slide summarize our priorities to ensure student success. And I'll walk through these in more detail on subsequent slides. You will see that these areas are aligned to what we shared with you and as recently as the last school committee meeting. So you will hear some familiar things here. First, accessing grade level learning through high quality instructional materials, targeted student supports, and professional learning to support our educators in practices that are aimed at providing access to grade level proficiency is our first area of priority. Second, we are focusing on expanding inclusive learning opportunities for all of our students, which includes access to bilingual education. The next few bullets also expand on not only delivering on these first two areas, but we need to be able to also recruit and retain diverse and highly effective educators and leaders who can best serve our students. Our students flourish when they are in community hub schools, where they have connected learning experiences beyond traditional programming. It is also essential for our young people to have multiple pathways that provide access to post-secondary success, both academically through early college opportunities, for example, as well as work-based learning. On the next slide, I'll dive a bit deeper into some examples of our first priority area. For example, we added reading specialists with ESSER funds to provide targeted needs to give students the boost they need to perform at grade level. So we moved more of those positions to operating funds off of ESSER with investments from the city. We also leveraged ESSER to fund teacher leadership roles to support professional learning. We'll maintain a significant part of this funding while also positioning the work to more strategically work district-wide. We also added capacity to supporting the operational and coordination work with school leaders that we will continue to implement with operating funds. As we planned for the ESSER step down, you'll see in this box below, during this past fiscal year, just to give you a little bit of context around that in terms of this priority area. You'll see that we have an example of moving our equitable literacy coaches to operating funds, as well as our multilingual family resource specialists. And that team works in close tandem with Dr. Taveras and her team as it relates to family liaisons, as well as the Welcome Center. On the right, you'll see in the ESSER carryover list that we've also really looked at how to strategically use our remaining ESSER funds to access grade level learning. Some examples here include access to high quality instructional materials. You heard Leslie Miller speak of that last week, And then also part of the work has been direct supports to students. Some examples here include online subscriptions to student programs in literacy and also language development as it relates to our multilingual learners with and without disabilities. Students with disabilities also take part in these particular online subscriptions that help all of our students accelerate their learning. And then also we have some additional funding that we are putting towards outdoor classroom learning opportunities. Part of this is in tandem with Dr. Tapina and his team in building the facilities and maintaining those outdoor classrooms, but also part of this falls under academics in terms of providing a 7th grade specific experience at the Hale Reservation in Thompson Island. On the next slide, I'll provide some additional details around our second priority area. In order to prepare every school to provide inclusive learning opportunities for all students, our inclusive education team, who works directly with our inclusive education planning teams, or you've heard us refer to them as IPTs in the schools, was originally funded through ESSER, and we are continuing to resource this important work through operating funds. We were also able to add service providers, including bilingual psychologists with ESSER funds, and we have also prioritized sustaining that support through operating funds. Just a quick example here in the box of how we've strategically looked to maintain important initiatives through operating funds this past year. You'll see that we moved a number of supports we started to support bilingual programs, and we moved that over to permanent sources. This reflects some of the work that we're doing in curriculum development with bilingual resources, as well as native language assessments. On the right, you'll see that we're also going to use remaining funds to support our IPT stipends, which funds the planning work at each of the schools in alignment with our BTU collective bargaining agreement. On the next slide, you'll see our remaining priorities are captured here on this last slide. We leveraged ESSER resources for our hub schools pilot over the last few years. So we will not only sustain these current resources, but we're also committing to additional operating funds to expand up to 6 additional schools. And right now we are working with the BTU and our community partners to determine which schools those will be, but you did hear about one of the schools, which was the BCLA McCormick. This last year, we also added regional school leaders who work alongside our regional school superintendents to provide school leaders with the coverage sometimes when school leaders are out on leave, but also they are instrumental in creating the continuity in leadership and support within our schools. We also maintained secondary program staff to support work in early college, counseling, and re-engagement centers. This work includes some particular work that we've shared publicly at the EMK, as well as the BCLA McCormick that was recently shared. As we continue to support our multilingual learners with and without disabilities and our students with disabilities, we began piloting some language acquisition assessments so that we would have more data to inform us of where our multilingual learners are and how we can better support them in real time. On this slide, there are also some examples of how we are strategically using remaining ESSER funds. Some of this will go to supporting our school leader pipeline, including professional learning as well as residencies. And we also have committed funding to support specific work around in our Office of Data and Accountability in terms of language development and other programs to support language development. Now I will turn the time over to my colleague, Dr. DePina.
Thank you, Dr. Tavares, and thank you, Dr. Chen. Good evening, Madam Chair, school committee members, and the public joining us this evening. As a reminder, our operations division comprises of our traditional operation departments, facilities management, transportation, OIT technology, and FNS food services, which is under our chief of operations, as well as 5 other departments: capital planning, finance, human capital, safety services, and student support. The work we do in our operations division is always in support in alignment with our district priorities. FY25 funding recommendations were made with the same lens in mind, looking deeply at the work that was done with ESSER dollars and prioritize work that was effective in meeting our goals as we made trade-offs. To highlight some of the investments made across our teams to date, we have expanded our business service unit model from 4 to 6 procurement partners and from 3 to 8 procurement clerks in order to increase capacity and better support schools and central departments with procurement and contracting. As a result, to date, the office has processed over 10,000 requisitions, clearing our backlog and reducing outstanding requisitions from over 1,000 to a rolling average of about 300. We continue to expand the number of schools cooking from scratch. In school year 2022-23, we started with 65 schools and expanded to 76. This year, we've grown to freshly prepared meals at 97 schools to date and are on track to reach our goal of 100 by the end of this month. Third, we stabilized the payroll unit to dramatically reduce errors in processing and timely payments for full-time and stipended staff. The completion of an internal audit, we recognize we still have more work to do in the Office of Human Capital. To that effect, we are moving ahead with an external review through the Council of Great City Schools to gather additional recommendations based on best practice and industry standards. This will help us better align and streamline our work in the Office of Human Capital. The transportation team has continued to focus on driving improvements as well. Through the new vendor contract with Transdev, we've continued hiring and training of bus drivers and monitors. The implementation of routing and operational improvements highlighted in last year's Council of Great City Schools review. These efforts have been reflected in improved transportation service for students. For the 2023-24 school year through January, morning on-time performance has improved by 4.8 percentage points, and afternoon on-time performance has improved by 6 percentage points compared to last school year. In addition, the percentage of trips missing GPS data has decreased by 4.1 percentage points in the morning and 5.4 percentage points in the afternoon compared to last school year. Sorry, the 2022-23 school year. Next slide. The goal of the BPS Facilities Department, Office of Safety Services, and Capital Planning is to expand access to safe, healthy, energy-efficient learning spaces. The publication of the BPS Long-Term Facilities Plan provided key data at our fingertips with a rubric that allows us to make smart, data-driven decisions around our school buildings. This ensures every student has access to a high-quality student experience. To implement this work, a division within operations was created using ESSER and will now continue on our operating budget. I want to thank Dr. Tavares and the Office of Equity, Community, Family and Advancement for their immense support and cross-collaboration through the community engagement process that occurred across the city with all these endeavors. This has and will continue to assist us in making thoughtful decisions as we move through this very important work. The Facilities Condition Assessment Dashboard helped us look into identifying needed infrastructure repairs in our buildings. The addition of a team within this Office of Facilities will help us review and plan for infrastructure investments as well as day-to-day maintenance requests we receive through our Asset Essentials work order system. As we looked at one-time investments using our ESSER carry-forward funds, one of the key partnerships was with the Division of Academics, specifically the maintenance and operation of our outdoor classrooms and gardens, which is the work Dr. Chen highlighted as an investment in her division. Another important need for these one-time funds is improving air quality and ventilation in our classrooms. This is a critical part of BPS's indoor air quality management plan, and this infusion of funding allows us to continue maintenance and repair air purifiers and replacement of their filters. Next slide, please. The goal of the Student Support Division, in collaboration with the Division of Academics, Division of Schools, is to provide social, emotional, and academic support to students through mentoring, social workers, and increased professional development on trauma-informed practices and incident response. This slide highlights key outcomes happening in our district, but I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight a few more. The Student Development and Advancement Team, through over 25 new programs and initiatives, have served over 1,500 students this year. 93% of these students have been our Black and Brown students. Last year, the district ran 3 college tours, and this year we've been able to significantly improve that to 7 tours with over 140 students participating. Well, over 240 students participating, I apologize. I highlighted the Housing Stability Program on the slide. Another key highlight is that over 1,600 families experiencing homelessness have been permanently housed since 2021 through the BPS Housing Voucher Partnership with the Boston Housing Authority. A priority here was to sustain our student support personnel related to this important work, some of which is highlighted on the slide. As one-time key priorities, we are continuing our academic mentoring, housing stability, and wraparound services. We will also continue to invest in the BAM-WOW partnership around therapeutic mentoring in 12 schools. Next slide, please. We want to take a time and just acknowledge that all BPS staff are the lifeblood of our organization. I can't underscore that enough. We also recognize the end of ESSER signals a huge shift in how we can continue our staffing model. To the extent possible, we will endeavor to retain our highly qualified staff. We are committed to support any transition that may arise due to these shifts. Our Office of Human Capital team is ready to support in a number of ways, some of which are highlighted here. Our talent ed system will continue to be updated with current vacancies, and we strongly encourage impacted staff to apply for any positions where they may be qualified, and also to attend the Office of Human Capital's office hours with any questions they may have. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, David Bloom.
Thank you, Dr. Pina. I'll just close the presentation by reminding those viewing that we have extensive information available online, including tonight's presentation, a variety of informational sheets about school budgets, as well as the total overall preliminary budget. All documents are available translated tonight or will be translated shortly if they are not currently available translated. We are looking forward to coming back to you in about 2 weeks with our revised budget before this vote. But at this time, we'd love to turn it back to the committee for questions. Thank you.
Thank you all for the presentation. And because this is a budget hearing, I want to pause here for public comment. Then we'll come back and open it up to questions and comments from the committee. We'll now move on to public comment. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. This budget hearing is an opportunity for parents, caregivers, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on the superintendent's FY25 budget proposal. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. We have 2 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. If your remarks are longer than 3 minutes, please email your comments for distribution to the committee. The time that an interpreter uses for English interpretation will not be deducted from a speaker's allotted time. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you're from before you begin. We'll begin this evening with John Mudd, followed by Sherry Davis. If you could please raise your hands virtually. Mr. Mudd.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is John Mudd. I'm a resident of Cambridge and a longtime education advocate in Boston.
Mr. Mudd, you're on mute.
Did I get it off?
Now
Yes, you're good.
I
Thank you.
apologize. I have both technologically challenged and a tremor. I'm a resident of Cambridge and a longtime education advocate in Boston. All of my comments use the figures from the all funds budget, not the general fund, which is what is usually presented earlier and tonight. There is a significant difference. The general fund budget, which you've heard tonight and earlier, shows an $81 million increase versus the all funds budget, which shows an $84 million decrease. If anyone thinks, can advise me why the all funds budget should not be the basis for discussion, please let me know. There on analysis, there are some reductions in the central budget that should be explained. But to my mind, much more important are the budget details that reveal huge shifts between English learners, general education, and special education that cry out for explanation about what they will mean for these students' education. Specifically, English learning, the program budget is cut by over $11 million and 105 positions, or 10% from the current operating level. General education is cut by 43 million and 312 positions. And special education is the big winner. It increases by 25 million and 290 positions. What is the meaning of all of this? This has huge potential educational implications. It has been said earlier that tonight that these cuts are only a result of the recodification of positions or some reclassification, according to DESE. But what does that really mean? The school committee and the public need to know the details. What cuts are coming from where and what additions are going where? And if there are cuts in bilingual positions that are recodified, will the job descriptions still have bilingual requirements for those jobs? Or is this another way of reducing the number of bilingual teachers and aides in the system? With a system that has maintained and increased enrollment of immigrants, this would seem to be moving in the wrong direction. So what direction are we moving from? These are huge changes. What are the projected impact on Blacks, Latinos, English learners, and special education students? as required in the racial equity planning tool. These are huge changes. You and we are owed an explanation and have received none about these broad educational changes. Please demand a clear explanation of the budget and job cuts and their projected impact on the education of these students. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd. Our next speaker is Sherry Davis.
Hello,
Hi, good evening.
good evening. My name is Sherry Davis, and I'm a current member of our United Neighborhood Association, which is located in Dorchester, where I live, and have been a member here in Dorchester for almost 60 years. I've listened to everything that you guys have said, and my hat goes off to you because this appears to be a big challenge that's up on you. However, I wanted to hear more about your safety. What is going on with the safety in terms of the children that are being bullied in the schools? I wanted to amplify that the children who are being bullied today will be tomorrow's bullies. I'm not certain if you guys have put that into your evaluations. I heard there are a couple of doctors and so on there. I have a granddaughter who has been bullied since she's been in first grade. And it seems as though all the attention has been put up on the child with the behavior problems, and the children who does not have behavior problems are fending for themselves. The child that has the behavior problems has tendency to be bullied are the ones that are being protected. And I would like to hear what's going to happen in the future in terms of helping to advocate for these young students who are being bullied. How are you going to protect these children in the future? I heard a lot of spending going on in terms of for the transportation, which picks up and delivers certain groups of students. And a lot with the inclusive learning. I would like to learn a little bit more about that, if I may. That's basically all I have to say. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. We have your contact information, so someone from the district will be reaching out to connect about your grandchild. Thank you. Chair Robinson, that concludes our speakers for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. And I want to thank everyone who spoke tonight. Your input is critical as we consider the superintendent's budget recommendation for this next fiscal year. Now I'd like to open it up to questions from the committee. Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I want to share something with us. My nephew arrived from the Dominican Republic, and he went to a school that is no bilingual school, right? So he's an English learning student. I want to share it. And the last week, my nephew talked to me, say her teacher, please, miss, give me a hug because I'm very sad because nobody is speaking Spanish in my classroom. When my nephew talked to me this particular story, my heart is very sad because that story is the same that too many story the English learning students in Boston. And my question is about the Title I. The Title I is, I see that $30 million for putting an English learning student. My question exactly is, ¿están de acuerdo? Y ahora voy a pasar a español. ¿Están de acuerdo que hay un porcentaje alto del título 1, específicamente 30 millones, que deben colocarse para los estudiantes aprendices del idioma inglés? Es mi primera pregunta.
So my first question is, as part of the allocation of $30 million that goes to the ELL English language learners, or as part of Title I, is there a specific percentage out of that $30 million that goes to the English language learners as part of Title I?
Thank you, Member Polanco Garcia, for your question. For each school, the percentage is a little bit different. Each school looks at their allocation of Title I funds and the percentage of their population that is English learners. And those two numbers together determine what portion of their Title I funding needs to focus on English learners. So if the school is approximately 50% English learners, then the school is required to spend about half of their Title I on English learners, and so on, depending upon the percentage. So a school with more English learners has to spend more of their Title I to support English learners.
Yeah, 1 second. I understand, but the last year, too many schools return the money, right?
Yes.
¿Cómo el distrito, my question, cómo el distrito da seguimiento a cómo deben alocarlo? ¿Cuál es en beneficio y provecho de los estudiantes?
So the question is, how does the district monitor all the resources that had been returned? Because it is my understanding that last year, some of those funds were returned. To benefit the students themselves, how is the district monitoring these funds?
So we have a two-step monitoring approach. The first is during the year, we have a Title I for English learners liaison who works directly with schools to try to get them to spend their money in the first year of the grant. Then if money is not spent in that by the end of the first year of the grant, the money is all sort of collected together that is unspent and transferred to the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education for them to spend in the second year of the grant exclusively for English learners.
Pero es que yo me refiero al fondo central, al dinero que va al fondo central, que es del título 1.
I am referring specifically to the general budget that belongs to Title I, the general budget itself.
Es el dinero que del dinero del fondo central, ¿entiendes? Yes.
If you understand what I mean, which is part of the general budget.
I see. So the portion that's not on the school budgets, is that correct? The portion that's on
Y no por escuela, no como, mi pregunta es no como los principales de las escuelas lo colocan, sino del fondo central, que pueden decir, vamos a tener tutoría para los niños que son aprendices del idioma inglés, que están pagando. ¿Cómo podemos exhibir ese logro? ¿Cómo? Para cada niño en favor y provecho de ellos.
It is not necessarily how it is not necessarily how the principals or leadership is allocating those funds to school. Is it what is the central officer is doing in terms of deciding how to allocate those funds? How much are we going to allocate for tutoring? How much are we going to allocate for English language learners? The office itself, not necessarily the allocation that takes place or is directed by the principals into the schools.
So for all of the remaining programs that are outside of schools, there's a couple of decisions that get made. The first is we review with the superintendent what types of programs are funded on Title I. The second then is all programs that are funded centrally by Title I are required to offer equitable access for English learners in the program. So, for example, if we were to fund a Acceleration Academy, for example, using Title I, we need to ensure that that Acceleration Academy offers equitable access to English learners in accordance with whatever their programming needs are.
Sí, perdona que insista, pero quiero tener claridad cómo podemos exhibir esto, cómo podemos dividirlo y decir, es que cómo lo hacemos. La 5W, ¿cómo lo hacemos? ¿Cómo podemos mostrar transparentemente que los estudiantes aprendices del idioma inglés van a tener el beneficio y provecho de este dinero que es para ellos, para el beneficio y provecho de ellos?
It is just a matter of finding different ways to show this transparently. The process has to be transparent, and so they will be able to understand, or the families or the constituents, how those funds are divided or allocated specifically into the ELL recipients.
I really appreciate that feedback, and we will work to ensure that our sort of Title I budget as a whole is more easily available online and with you. So we will be coming back to you again in probably September for the next year's Title I budget when we get the formal application from the state. And we will work to share with you a revised explanation of that budget then that will hopefully address some of your feedback and concerns.
Thank you. Y estaré esperando. Y quise compartir la historia de mi sobrino, porque al igual que él, hay muchos English learners que están en espera de que por favor le presten atención y más ayuda.
Thank you very much for the information. I wanted to share the information about my nephew because many students are in his same position looking for that help. And that is the case for the English language population. They are in need of this type of help. They are waiting for that. And I'll be looking forward for that information you're going to forward me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have more questions, but I want okay. The second round.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tran?
I don't know whether it is appropriate for me to raise this, but the questions raised by Mr. John Mudd are of concerns to me. So if you could somehow answer some or all of those his questions at this hearing now, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to take a crack at it. And please ask any follow-up questions you have. So I'll start with Mr. Mudd's first comment about the difference between the general fund budget and the all funds budget, which is an important piece of information for us to clarify. The general fund budget is the main thing that we are reviewing today with the school committee. It is what you will vote on. The rest of the budget that contributes to the all funds is all of our external grant funding. This is not what will be voted on at the end of the month, but instead will be returned to the committee when we get more information from those grantors, like the federal government, later in the spring, through the fall. So we'll come back and you'll vote on Title I in particular, Title II, et cetera, when we get those grants. What this does instead is give you an estimation of our expected revenue from those grants for next year. And these estimates are pretty good, especially for the big federal grants. The reason why there is such a big discrepancy between the general fund this year, the change on the general fund this year, positive 81 million, and the change in the all funds this year is due to the end of ESSER. ESSER is included in our all funds budget, and it's an approximately $160 million swing from how much money we expected to have this year to how much money we're expecting to have next year, which is zero. So that's the biggest difference in that first section of Mr. Mudd's comments, which was the difference between the all funds and the general fund. And you'll see if you look through our tables documents, you'll see that there's 4 sets of tabs. There's one that says .gf, which is general fund, one that says .ef, which is all external funds, which means grants, except for ESSER, one that says .ESSER, which is just ESSER, and then one that says .af, which is all things summed together. The other thing that Mr. Mudd was mentioning was the discrepancies between 3 main categories of instructional staff: general education staff, bilingual staff, and special education staff. There's a few things going on at the same time there that are hard. The first is, as we shift to more inclusive education, we are tagging more positions in our budget as requiring or working with special education. That is responsible for the majority of the shift between general education and special education. The other thing that's happening in terms of the general fund is as a couple of schools have closed and consolidated, we are seeing a reduction in general education coded positions. The other thing that is happening this year is as we shift from district SEI in schools to DESE SEI in schools, what that does is it requires us, by our sort of traditional financial coding rules, to recode a position that had traditionally been coded as bilingual to being coded as general education. When we switch from district SEI to DESE SEI, that changes. When we switch from district SEI to transitional bilingual or newcomer or dual language, it stays within that bilingual umbrella. So even if the homeroom teacher is still in that room next year, the same person is there, if we're changing from sort of district SEI to DESE SEI, we see that change in our tables in our financial system, even if the students don't experience a huge amount of change on the ground. And so what we are looking into this year and continuing to look into based on the feedback we've received is, are there ways we can more clearly document and explain that so it doesn't seem like we're doing these big cuts of bilingual positions as we go through this process of transition that the superintendent, Dr. Chen, have been outlining for several months. So our team has been working closely with them to understand what's going on, but we do also need to make some more technical updates to our system to reflect sort of those new changes in codes, and we're working collaboratively on that.
So just to follow up on that, with the incoming recodification of positions, those positions that were previously designated as bilingual positions, I know that it will be pretty much transforming into general positions. The requirement Mr. Mudd raised is also of my concern. Are those teachers, are those positions required to be bilingual in the kind of language that it is to be providing education? Or is it going to be open to everybody whether you are monolingual, bilingual, or multilingual?
I will try this. I see Chief Canty on the call, and I'll let her chime in if I get this wrong. Many of our existing positions that are coded as bilingual in the financial system coding do not actually require a bilingual staff member to be in the position to fill it, right? So this change does not actually reflect a change in the requirements for the position. However, we are working deeply and closely with our school teams to hire bilingual staff that meet the needs, the language needs and capacity of the students at the school they serve. So we are while the position doesn't require a language, it is a significant part of the hiring process and a preference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lima Barbosa.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent. Dave, welcome back. Congratulations to you and your family. Some of my questions were answered already, but Dave, can you walk us through some examples of positions that were consolidated in a central office, and what type of impacts it might have? My assumption is that they were consolidated because we don't need them, or just walk me through, like, the decision making there, which ones to decide. I know we've talked about it in other hearings, but just to centralize it here. And then my second question, if the Deputy Superintendent, Ana Tavares, could come back and just really walk me through over how are we supporting the migrant families at the Melania ACAS recreational complex. Just walk me through: a family arrives, and what is the service, what is the interaction, who are they speaking to, what resources they're being connected with, is it just assigning them to a school, just so we can really understand what operationally that looks like, because like I mentioned at the hearing, this is a phenomenon that's not going to stop, and we really need to see how we're going to continue to invest in this for future budget as well. So those are the main two questions that I have for right now. If we can get those answers, that would be great. Thank you.
I'll try and briefly answer the first one and then turn it over to Dr. Tavares, which is just, without getting too specific, because I don't want to, sort of talk about someone's job live on camera. I can speak a little bit to some things that are happening in the finance department. So we had a couple of projects that we were running using ESSER funds, right? That were collaborating with other departments. In our case, it was most often with the Office of the Legal Advisor and the Office of Human Capital, right? And we were working together to get these projects underway. And with ESSER, we had the benefit of being able to really fully staff up these projects and get it all started. As ESSER's ending, we took a look across our projects, including the contracting work that Dr. Pina mentioned earlier. And we were actually able to find 2 to 3 positions, depending on a little bit how you think about it, in finance that we were able to consolidate because sort of the work is either been established in another department, or we're able to sort of build it in. We needed those people to do the startup work, but now it's able to be built into our day-to-day routines. In those cases, in my department, there are some people involved who are going to be looking for new opportunities. We're hopeful to be able to retain as many of them as possible. But, as we think about being efficient with our resources, we want to make sure that if we don't really need a position to advance the work moving forward, we're able to build it into other people's jobs, especially centrally, that we do that as much as possible.
Hello, school committee member Barbosa. I would love to walk you through what a potential entrance of a family could look like, with also respecting that so many of our families come at different places and different levels, and with different preparation to engage with the folks that work at the welcome centers. I've been lucky enough to observe many of the days there, and it never ceases to surprise me how incredibly flexible and agile the teams are. They have to consider the preferred language of the family. They have to consider what documentation they do and do not have. They have to consider, they may not even be at the correct welcome center. And of course, they're welcome at all the welcome centers, but maybe they confuse which one is closer to them and if they have to return, like all of these things all at once and at different points depending on the family. Some families come in with, the traditional parent, and some families come in as a guardian, and some families come in as the grandmother or the auntie, at all of these things. And then we have to make sure that the paperwork verifies all. And there's a long list that I'm happy to share with you. And I would love for you to come with me and actually spend even an hour or two in one of the welcome centers with me, because it's eye-opening to me every time I do it, and I'm sure that many of the school committee members, it would be quite eye-opening for them too. I'll give you an example of a couple of the families that I actually observed. One mother came in, she had twin boys, one entering second grade, and they had just arrived from Guatemala. And the mother was greeted at the entrance, and she obviously was going to need some interpretation services. So she was connected with someone who spoke Spanish. I was able to look through her paperwork. They didn't know who I was, so I was helping, like I was doing the receiving. And some of the documentation, especially the birth certificates and the things that we need to verify where they live, I had to help her look through. The mom brought in a folder filled with everything. And literally just going through the different documentations and using a checklist, I was helping her figure out what is the paperwork you need and what is the paperwork you don't need to share with the center. And I mean, the process from beginning to end. And I also observed how they welcomed the mom into an area where she sat, and she happened to have the children with her. So they were, on the side with her. And the engagement was all around, what has been their schooling before. Again, the paperwork took the most amount of time, I would say. And even verifying some of the documents that were in Spanish, making sure that we were able to find translations for all of those pieces. And ultimately, it was a look at what are the options that the mother has in order to place her children. So really trying to match, what zone and what region she lives in, making sure that transportation, if that's what she needed. So all of those pieces, and I'm giving you like the quick version of it. But I would say with this one mother and her two children, spent at least 2 hours with her. And that's one case. Some cases a parent comes in and they have all of the documentation. They really don't need help, and it can go a little bit faster, an hour. And some folks actually have to go back home because there's some documents that are not there. And for those folks and we ask them how, are you able to return? Do you have transportation? Some of the appointments and the follow-up appointments are also made via Zoom or online, because we want to support families whose transportation can be a real issue. Or even to say to them, you came to this welcome center, there's actually a welcome center even closer to your home. So those are the kind of things that are definitely a constant with trying to support just the process. So it's never ever one thing. It's never easy and clean and everyone comes in like a cookie cutter. Every single family is a very unique case, a different language, different needs with documentation. And then you asked about services. Many times what I find, we're supposed to be registering students at these welcome centers, right? And half of the time you're also connecting them with organizations. For whatever thing that is needed, or some families are very open with, oh, I have this and this and this, and some families are very closed, and it's actually in the process of doing the intake that you're like, oh, wait a minute, oh, educación especial, oh, eso es, that's different, and then it comes out in the conversation, and sometimes it's not until they reach the school that the actual connections that need to happen for that family are actually made. So it's all of that and everything in between. And I hope that answered some of your question.
No, that you did, and thank you for naming that. You know, it's gonna look very different for each family because of the many factors that you've pointed out. And I think that is like why I really wanted you to say more, like what a potential case could look like. But they could look so different from each other. Families are going to need services beyond the educational services that the district has the responsibility when it comes to the kids. But I'm just really interested on how staffing is going right now. I see the investment is there for FY25, but really making sure that folks are trained and equipped to deal with these different cases and different families that are coming with different needs that they're looking for. So I'm gonna take on your invitation. Happy to have other members join me the way that we can without breaking any rules. But it would be key for us to like be there and be able to see how you all are supporting families and also supporting the staff that are supporting these families because they're learning a lot. It's a lot of stories. Sometimes it can be triggering in itself too. So hopefully everybody's taking care of themselves in that process. So I don't have any questions at this time. Some of them were answered. Ms. Committeeman Polanco Garcia is hitting the questions around how we're really investing in our multilingual students. What are the rules, the standards, the requirements, and is the district meeting those? Like, I appreciate you asking that because I would also wanted to hear a little bit more about that. But I'm all set for now, Chair. Thank you for this time.
Ready. Thank you. Mr. O'Neill.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think all the other members have gone, right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So for first round here, Mr. Bloom, welcome back. And congratulations on the latest addition to your family. I trust mother and son are doing well.
Thank you. Yes, everyone's well.
Excellent. Well, welcome back, and your colleagues did an admirable job in your absence. So I do have a number of questions. No surprise about budget. This is what it's all about, right? A couple of points first, and I do appreciate your comments on the estimates for particularly federal, Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, et cetera. And we'll probably have a better indication, I think, from the council next week on preliminary allocations to state, and then how it gets broken down by the state. And so I have spent quite a bit of time perusing the budget proposal book. So thank you for putting that together and getting it out. And I do note that all the grants that we approved last year, I believe, are in the back of the book. So it kind of shows, how the external funds break out and that we're voting on later. I was surprised by one thing when I read in the very last page of the book that the Title I level is now 35% poverty. For some reason, I've had it in my head for a while that it is 40% poverty. And I do know that that either the feds or the state changed it somewhat recently, but is it now 35%? Because it refers to 4 schools that don't hit the 35% figure and now get no federal funding on Title I, at least.
Yeah. I'm not fully sure about the history of when the change happened. I can say the 35% rule is a federal part of the requirement, not a state requirement. So this isn't that change wasn't a DESE change. I think we had historically gotten a waiver from DESE in the way we had applied the rule, and DESE has sort of informed us that that's not actually this. They got revised guidance from the feds that wasn't allowable. Essentially, what the rule says is that if you're giving money to a school below the line, you have to give more money than to schools above the line. And effectively, the way the math works out is if you were to give money before the schools below the line, you have to give more money to schools, the highest need schools. And the amount more money you'd have to need to give to those schools means you run out of money before you even get to the 35% school. So it's this interesting math. So it's a very technical thing that I'd be happy to go into in more detail, but the short answer is yes, the cutoff effectively is 35%. There was some revised guidance from the state about the federal rule this past fall. And yes, so right now, we have these 4 schools that are estimated to be below it. And I'll just say it is a very tricky thing for our schools, and I can appreciate this, that they're having to go through their budget process now, and we don't actually get the enrollment information from the state until the summer.
Right.
And the final numbers about whether or not they will hit 35%, we don't know until the summer.
It's just interesting because we have used 40% as a Title I or non-Title I school definition in another calculation the school department does in a different manner, non-budget related. And when that was put in place, it was because it was said, well, that's the federal definition of Title I. So that's why it caught my attention. I'm not sure if the numbers dramatically change between 35 and 40%, the amount of schools that we have that would be considered Title I or non-Title I schools. But I just want to point that out. But I want to move on to a couple of things. Are we anticipating, again, you've made estimates here for state funding, but state funding flows to the city, and then the city takes out for the charter schools, et cetera, right? So changes in state funding are not going to impact what we've estimated for general fund, right?
Not for general fund, no. For some of the state grants, we like to keep an eye on. We have some sort of direct state funding through some grants, but yes, for Chapter 74A, that'll have no impact on our general fund budget.
So for folks that have been asking questions about the changes in FTEs expected, you actually have all that information in the budget proposal book.
Yes.
So I'm not going to spend time on that. I am going to focus in on a couple of areas, though, that did catch my eye. And I'm looking at this case in page 57 of 68, which is a summary by department category for all funds. And that is on the left side, you have the FTEs of 24 adopted, 24 current, and then 25 recommendation and what the variance is by FTE. On the right side, you have the dollar amount. A couple of things that caught my eye is food and nutritional services. Now, Mr. DePina had mentioned, Chief DePina, excuse me, had mentioned that food service costs are going up $4 million, where you talked about costs going up. So you had transportation costs going up $12 million and food service costs going up $4 million. But I was surprised to see a reduction in the FTEs for food service from 407 down to 375. And could you help me out with that, please? Particularly as I know we still have a few more schools that needed to get the My Way cafes or whatever we're calling them right now. I believe we had a new name for them, and I apologize.
I apologize as well. I also don't remember the new name.
So
I have to
cooking fresh in schools, I'll say.
Yes,
I know we're almost down to just a couple of schools yet. And there's been some
BPS
really
BPS
quick.
Eats. BPS Eats. BPS Eats.
BPS Eats. Okay, great. And I know we've been making great progress in food service. I've been in a number of schools recently where we're cooking fresh and love to see it. And the food service employees, God bless them, they're some of the best people to talk to in the schools, right? They really know what's going on.
Yes.
But help me out with that FTE number, please. Why the decline? I would have expected actually that going up because I know we had some shortfalls in the past year.
Yes, I'll have to double check that for you. I know one way it's going down is with the consolidation of merger in the up schools. There was a significant lunch program that used to run in the Gavin for Up Boston that isn't running anymore, but that wouldn't be anywhere close to that difference. So I'll have to double check and get back to you. Most likely it's something about the way we're managing our part-time versus full-time staff, but I'll confirm that and get back to you unless you've got that.
Yeah, and I could also add that it also is driven by meals per labor hour formula that drives our staffing. So we tend to staff our sites based on the number of meals that they serve as a formula for that. So that also contributes to it as well.
But Chief DePina, are we getting closer to, break even on food service? I know that's always the goal. I know we've made a huge investment over the couple of years, and it's a right area to invest in. I applaud it completely. But how are we doing on the food service budget overall?
Yeah, overall, we're still running a slight deficit as well that we're managing down, as we have over the years. So that continues to be an area, but with the increase in fresh meals and freshly prepared services, increasing our salad bars, all those things that we want to do that's better for our kids ultimately comes with a cost that we're paying for now. So although we've reduced our budget in the past years based on past practices, now with these new investments and initiatives that we want to roll out, those also come at a cost that we're sorting through.
I'll just say I know it's probably not a priority for anyone in the federal government right now, but the USDA reimbursement rate does not accomplish what you really want to be able to do with a healthy, fresh cooked meal for students, especially if you're trying to source local ingredients and really have good food.
And I'm really a big advocate, as the superintendent knows, of, even making sure all of our students get breakfast as well.
Yes.
Whether it's breakfast after the bell in the classroom, et cetera. And, we've seen it in practice how it's working. But if our students are hungry, they're not learning, right? So it's such an important investment for us. Moving on to transportation, Mr. DePina, since I still have you there. So I noticed there as well a line item reduction in FTEs, and is that from continued consolidation of routes? Help me out with what it is, because I know we actually had an increase last year. We had more backup drivers, et cetera. So help me out with what's going on in transportation.
Yeah, it's also a combination of looking for efficiencies internal, and I don't know if Chief Rosengard's on, but he can help us add a little bit of detail here as well. But we're also with bus monitors, we're also funding them as we get them instead of holding them on the books as well. So there's a lot of that going on. But Chief Rosengard, if you want to elaborate on some of those shortfalls.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for that question, Member O'Neill. Bus drivers, actually, since they're TransDev employees, I don't believe you'd see them on the BPS FTE list here, but Deputy DePina is right. I think this is looking at the bus monitor FTE numbers, and partly this is as we've done so much work with hiring over the past year, we're now at close to 730 active monitors, and that's helped us get a better sense of how many monitors we truly need to be fully staffed. And what we've seen is, the past few months being at that level, we've been able to meet our student needs much better than we were before, and that helped us refine and streamline some of those numbers.
Yeah. Okay. And I can just add that it is this tricky thing in our tables is we never know whether to do the addition or subtraction from the adopted or the current.
Yeah.
So our proposed budget for next year reflects more monitors than we had at this time last year, and more than we started the year with, but less than the number of current positions than we have now. So it reflects a decrease from the number of positions we have in the system right now, but not actually a decrease in the number of filled positions or monitors.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Of course, this doesn't. This is FTE's current approved, not current positions filled, right?
Exactly right.
So it doesn't help us get to the net number of how many positions that we really lose. And I understand that. And I have to shout out our fellow member, Ms. Polenko Garcia, since we're talking about bus monitors, the work that she did to help recruit this year in that very important space. So takes all hands on deck, right? Another number I'm trying to understand is, and particularly in light of our conversation last week at the school committee about MSBA and capital budgets, is our actual internal BPS maintenance budgets. And that's to make improvements, smaller scale improvements, right? So, and it's always hard for the committee to understand that capital budgets, building buildings, doing major renovations, et cetera, come from the city. It's funded by the city. It's on the city capital budgets line. It's not a budget that we look at. It's not a budget that we approve. It's not a budget, quite frankly, that we have say in. But then we have the facilities maintenance budget. So, Mr. Bloom, can you just spend a little bit of time talking about that? Is that going up? How is it in relative to the need? And how is it relative to the capital budget of the city, of which BPS gets a piece?
Yeah.
And I apologize, Chair. I went over my 5 minutes.
It's
So
okay.
if you want me to stop and see if others had another round,
Finish. I know that Ms. Polanco Garcia wants to go again. I have a couple of questions, but finish. We're a small group tonight, and this is important. It's our last time together.
Okay, so why don't we have this conversation about the facilities maintenance budget and the capital budget, and then I'll pause.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
okay.
and I see Dr. Alkins has joined us as well, so thank you.
Is that okay with you, Ms. Polanco Garcia? Not sure if she could.
Yeah, she just.
Go ahead, Mr. Bloom. Sorry.
So I'll just say, so we have about $11 million of cost increases on the general fund for next year in terms of what we would call sort of level service of what we would typically spend our general fund dollars on. So, Vice Chair, like you mentioned, these are things like smaller repair projects in buildings, right? Maybe fixing a door, fixing a bathroom fixture that has an issue. We also are seeing some small savings in utilities. We had seen a big increase in natural gas prices a couple of years ago that required us to significantly budget more for utilities. That has moderated really significantly. So we are able to offset some of our cost increases with some savings in utilities. So you might see in the tables, facilities maintenance is going up, facilities management is going down. It's not because we're actually going to be spending less on facilities management. It's just that facilities management category in the program budget is where the utilities budget is, and there is a bit of a decrease there. That's sort of offsetting some of the change. We then, of course, have a very significant capital budget that we work with our partners in the city to make and manage. You know, under the capable leadership of Chief Stanislaus and others, Chief Ford and others in the district, you know, we really work closely with the city to manage that. That is a 5-year budget. So that capital budget reflects costs going out for 5 years of projects that are going, and those projects will cross fiscal years frequently. And those are things that are bigger in scale. So replacing the roof of a building, replacing all the windows, in addition to the things you might think of as traditional capital projects like building a new school. For anything that makes a major impact on the facility would come out of capital.
So, Mr. Bloom, could you give me a sense of, because I'm having trouble, I see facilities management, I don't see facilities maintenance. What is the budget for facilities?
Sorry, I just realized I was looking at a somewhat obscure portion of our tables.
It's okay, you know them well.
If I were to think about it just as the departments and just on the general funds, which is probably where I should have started. Let me pull that up quickly.
But basically, what are we spending to maintain and fix our buildings versus renovating our buildings?
All in between capital planning, the capital planning team itself, and all portions of our facilities budget, we're up about $8.5 million net, including some savings for things like utilities and some other efficiencies that the teams have identified.
And so, but what is the total budget for that?
Oh, sorry, the total?
Yeah.
Across those three teams is $117.5 million.
That was spending, maintaining, and
that
slightly improving our buildings, so to speak.
And that includes like all custodial services, all utilities, all the air conditioning, maintenance, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Perfect. And do you have a rough idea of what the BPS portion of the city's capital budget is?
I have to look at. I can pull up the most recent capital budget and tell you, but it's significant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have some pretty significant projects going on right now, right?
That's yes, for sure.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, in an ideal world, what do we think our maintenance budget would be?
I mean, in an ideal world, our maintenance budget would be lower because we would have entirely brand new buildings that would require less maintenance. But I think
I'm sorry, with our existing stock.
I apologize. That might be
you're absolutely right.
That might be my
sleep
deprived brain coming in there. No, I think, barring any major impacts, I think this budget is pretty good for what we're looking to do. I mean, I think the facilities team takes a really critical eye towards trying to be efficient and save money where possible, but also very much being clear about what the increased costs are. It's something we've worked deeply with them on over the 9 years I've been here, is how can we be very clear about what are the drivers of your costs so we can make sure we're providing funding for them. And so this year, as a part of our budget process, we worked deeply with the team to ensure they're getting all of the needed increases to maintain our buildings in the level of service they are right now, and to make, those sort of moderate improvements. Unfortunately, a lot of the improvements we need are capital.
So understand the difference between maintenance and minor upgrades versus capital. Madam Chair, I'll just stop by saying, I hope in the 117 million, we can find enough to do some painting and brighter lights and some lockers at BCLA. And I'll stop there, Madam Chair, and hopefully I can have one more round of questions that I want to push a little bit more about ESSA and sustainability of some of the things that are funded on that, but I'll wait and take that afterwards.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you say putting fund for professional development of family, can you tell a little bit more about this in particular? Because putting family development and the professional development of family, ¿cómo van a hacer esto? Me gustaría saber.
Yeah, how will you go about this? I would like to know more about it.
I will probably let that defer to my colleague, Dr. Tavares, if
My apologies. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah.
Sí,
cuando ustedes hablan de que van a poner, quiero saber que entendí que ustedes dijeron que van a poner del fondo dinero para oportunidades profesionales para las familias. Professional Development of Family. ¿Cómo van a hacer esto? ¿A qué se refieren? ¿Qué quieren decir con esto?
So it's so hard to respond to you in English and not do it in Spanish. I'll tell you that much. So one of the many ways in which we invest is what I mentioned in my talk around collaborating with academics as well. Parent University is one of the ways in which we support the development of families, as well as through our family liaisons. And with those two bodies, we have the opportunity to be able to invite families to come and learn about the initiatives, whether it's inclusive education, or even if they have questions about their student and how to support them with their learning at school. So there are many layers within the school and also outside of the school where we invite families to be part of I wouldn't call it necessarily professional development, but I know what you meant by professional development. It is a development of their understanding of how to access the learning for their student. And I want to invite Chief Sanchez, because she can tell you about even some more innovative things that they've been doing. Chief Sanchez, are you able to join us?
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Tavares. So some of the things that we've been doing in terms of development for families fall around our school site councils within our schools, and providing that type of development for not just families, but for families, teachers, as well as school leaders as they participate within our school site councils, which is our shared decision-making process. And so there's opportunity for professional development on how to partake in the shared decision-making process, which is really critical as part of families as well as teachers having voice on the decisions that are happening within their schools. So that's kind of one example in terms of how our families are developed. In addition to that, we are looking at different grant opportunities to provide more engagement within our schools for our families as well, such as the FIST program, which is a DESE provided grant that allows the opportunity for families to be able to engage in development within their own languages and how to best be part, again, of not just the decision-making in their schools, but also as part of development within themselves, including English language learner classes and other opportunities for them. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Gracias por responder, pero quiero enfatizar que nosotros debemos continuar estas conversaciones.
Thank you for answering my questions, but I also want to emphasize that we need to continue having these conversations.
Porque tenemos muchas familias que no hablan el inglés fluido, pero están interesados en ser monitores de buses.
Because we have a lot of families that are not, they don't speak English fluent, and they are interested to become bus monitors.
Entonces, cuando ustedes hablaban de desarrollo profesional, yo pensé, pueden ofrecer cursos de inglés básico para que estas familias puedan aprender lo básico para poder ser monitores de buses.
So when you were talking about family development or professional development, I thought that you were referring to classes or courses of tailor English for these skills that these people need for these positions.
Sería buenísimo.
That would be amazing.
Licenciada Polanco Garcia, you made me realize what the question was, so thank you. I will share with you an example of one school, and there are several, not just this one, but the Winship, for example, is a school that is partnered with English for New Bostonians, and that's an incredible program, and several of our schools offer English language classes for free to the community and to families at the school site, and the students get a kick out of seeing their own parent sitting at their desk learning English at night. So it's really cool to see their own parent as a student in the same desk that they sit in during the day. So that's one partner that does this work across several of our schools. But I know that, and I'm looking at our superintendent and at our chair, Robinson, as well, who've both been to one of the celebrations that the parents held. We were there together and we heard the testimony of exactly what you're saying, Licenciada Polanco Garcia, the importance and the pride and the incredible connections that families that are taking these English classes have when they're involved within the school taking these courses. So we absolutely are committed to making sure that there are more opportunities like this one example that I gave you with the Winship at all of our schools in BPS. That's a goal.
Thank you. Mi última pregunta es, thank you so much. Mi última pregunta es con relación a que podemos ver en los maestros bilingües en la tabla que estamos perdiendo 108 posiciones.
Okay, my last question is with regards to bilingual educators, teachers. I've seen in one of, right? There's bilingual teachers where we're losing 108 positions.
Entonces, son maestros bilingües que estamos perdiendo y escuché en la exposición escuché en la exposición de ustedes que van a poner mucho enfoque en English Learning, los programas de inclusión, el plan de inclusivo, Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a poder hacer esto si nosotros estamos perdiendo 108 posiciones de maestros bilingües, que más bien necesitamos más maestros bilingües?
So I heard through your presentation that we are losing 108 bilingual teachers. And then you were saying that we need to focus on retaining bilingual educators for the inclusion education. So how are we making sense of this? We're losing 108 bilingual teachers. And at the same time, we need more. We need to hire more bilingual teachers.
Yeah. It is a tricky situation to be in. So about half of that reduction is coming from ESSER, that are positions that were on ESSER. And what I will just say is that change of 108 positions reflects 108 positions that are changing from being coded as bilingual education to either being deleted or being changed to be another type of position. So it's not necessarily, nor is it particularly likely, that it actually is 108 educators that we're losing. As you know, many of our bilingual educators are the most valued in our school communities. So I think it's a tricky thing to balance and something we need to get better at in terms of how we code those positions to ensure that we make sure, that the positions that are recoded are sort of talked about differently than the positions that are actually fully eliminated. So, for example, we had there are a number of positions that were on ESSER that were for bilingual positions that are closing. We did have 13 positions closed due to low enrollment across the district. So classes with fewer than 5 students were about 13 of those positions. The remaining approximately 50 staff either had their coding changed to reflect the more inclusive practices that they'll be doing next year, or for the fact that DESE SEI positions are coded primarily as general education versus primarily bilingual education.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Alkins?
Hi, and thank you. I'm joining late. First of all, to David Bloom, I want to say congratulations. That's the first thing. Second, just sort of following up on that, like, so do we know, I mean, then we do know like what number of the 108 are recoded. And I know I've spoken to other people about this more like offline and individually, so I have a better sense of like what it is. But do we just have I think for families, just like a number that we know are recoded?
Yeah, let me turn it over to our budget director, Serena LaRock, who's got all the numbers at her fingertips to get you those details.
Hey there. So I think this is important in how we're looking at the budget tables. So the 108 is looking at a program code, and it's not necessarily bilingual teachers. So I'm going to move us to the FTE, which is roughly 63, that are actual bilingual teachers. And then if you then, the numbers that David mentioned, they would then add up. So the 13 FTE were due to the classroom consolidations that we mentioned. So 5 or fewer students. And so therefore those classrooms were closed. And then there was the 25 bilingual teachers that were coded as inclusion. And then the 24.7 is referencing the DESE SEI change. And so the 50 together is the coding portion. And then about 13 is the like actual loss on the bilingual teacher front.
Okay. Before we go around again, I do have a couple of questions. And again, to David Bloom, congratulations. I hope you're getting some sleep.
Yeah. I'll get that later.
You'll get that later. I wanted to go back a little bit to one of Ms. Polanco Garcia's question with regard to the bilingual staff, as well as what you had said earlier in terms of some positions not necessarily needing a bilingual staff person, but was in bilingual education. As our district becomes more and more bilingual, I do not know whether this is possible within our recruiting strategies. Is there any way that there can be part of the job description that prioritizes, mandates that all new hires are bilingual in one of the major languages that we need? Given the experience of Ms. Polanco Garcia's nephew, the idea that any of our schools would be without members who are particularly Spanish speaking, given that's the largest portion of our bilingual kids, feels like there is something wrong if we have this number of positions, but not enough of them are truly bilingual.
So, I mean, I'll just say in my short comment from before I left on leave, I know there were 2 amazing grants that we presented in my last meeting before I went on leave about expanding our work with creating diverse pipelines of educators. And that there was one of them in particular had a special focus on bilingual special educators, which is a crucial area of
But also my concern is if we are eliminating a number of existing jobs, are we able to retain all of those displaced truly bilingual educators? Because I would assume the younger and the newer educators coming in, are probably bilingual, but they're younger than some of our other members who may have taught but are not bilingual. So how do we retain the folks we've already invested in as our job categories shift?
Yeah.
Is there any way can we make sure of holding on to existing educators, even if their job gets eliminated or absorbed in a different way?
Yeah. So, Chair, I think this is something that Human Capital and Chief Canty are highly focused on. In certainly any staff who are multilingual or bilingual are of great value. So as our teachers who have experience. And so I think that there'll be a lot of working and support through OHC for positions that are changing. That said, I think the distinction of positions that were called something because of where the position lay in terms of the nature of the type of position or attachment to a particular program didn't necessarily equate somebody actually being bilingual or speaking another language at all. And so now going forward, this is a big piece of what we're trying to work on, which is when we look at recruitment and retention, and it's part of kind of the restructuring and the recoding, it's to actually ensure that we are trying to bring into the system as many educators who are diverse in linguistic. That being right. So that is going to be our passion and our a priority moving forward for all the reasons that members have indicated tonight. It is just that as we move through this coding exercise, that's going to be one of the ways that we start to understand better what our bilingual capacity is and is not. And it will take a year to 2 to actually do of that recoding to get a better understanding of the system, and then be able from a hiring perspective to make sure that we're hiring with language in mind as we're building out the system.
Great, thank you. A couple of things we really didn't discuss tonight that I have a question about. One is about in our special education programs, we don't talk at all about the students that are assigned to out-of-district placement. And my question is, particularly as we are relooking at our own inclusive practices, are we analyzing the, who is placed in out-of-district? Why are they placed? Are there options? Will there be options to either bring them back into the district, or are we creating options that will significantly lessen the number of out-of-district placements of the future, because we will have analyzed what we don't have and what people are seeking, and how are we trying to build more of that expertise in the district itself?
So Chair, and CFO Bloom, I'll take this one. So I think there's kind of two parts to this. I think it's a great question. So we are analyzing circuit breaker, which is actually our reimbursements for students who are in out-of-district placements. And to your point, Chair, we're looking from the lens of what would we need to be able to do to serve the students within our district programs. In some cases, it's strengthening programs. In other cases, it's creating programs that we don't necessarily have. And so therefore, the only choice for the parent and the student is to seek an out-of-district. So that exercise is actually going on, both in how do we strengthen our current programs so that parents and students have the faith to stay in our programs, but then also how do we build what's not yet there. I think additionally, that is part of inclusive ed, but it is also part of even our self-contained, and looking to say there might be situations in which in the past, like for instance, with our day school, like say Mel King, that's part of why we're really excited about being able to do a new facility and a rebuild for Mel King, and in that process, look at programming to strengthen it pre-K to 12 as a way that parents will feel they can get the services their students need and deserve for emotional impairment here in a therapeutic setting, and not necessarily have to go someplace else. So we're working kind of across the system right now in special ed. I think Chief Seal and Senior Advisor Trevisoni, they're both working hand in hand in partnership to look at this data in a way, frankly, that has not been done in the BPS previously.
Okay. We had a little bit of discussion about grants and, and their impact on district and overall on budget. I have a question particularly about our science programs, and I want to preface it by saying on Saturday, I briefly had an opportunity to attend the science fair at the Reggie Lewis Center. It was a very large and robust group of middle and high school students. And I saw projects, many of which I had no clue what they were talking about. However, they were very much engaged. And speaking to some of the leaders of this, they were saying this is we're rebuilding. We are, I guess, one of the oldest consistent science fairs across the nation. And I think there were maybe 78 or so participants. And one of the reasons why they are able to do this now is through a grant they had at GE for a number of years that paid for some science coaches. That grant is ending. And the excuse me. And right now, there don't seem to be funds that will be able to continue that program. And I worry about our overall investments in science, and particularly how are we doing with our Mass Core rollout. We invest a lot, and we talk a lot about our investments in literacy, which are important, but we need to be hearing about the investments in the other core subjects, as well. So I'm just interested in, where do we find the funds? How do we handle things like a program that was grant funded? Do we look for new grants to continue that funding? And if we don't find them, how do we make sure that these core programs don't begin to slip as we transition?
I will say that review of all of our grants is an important part of our budget process. So every department should have reviewed each of their grants through this process. I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the details of this particular program and its funding for the year. I can certainly reach out to my colleagues in the department and get some more information for you for our next time we're together.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dr. Chen.
Thank Linda, Dr. Chen. Yeah.
Sure. I think what's often difficult about these grants is that we get used to a particular service, and I just want to highlight a couple of things, and Leslie can certainly jump in if she wants to as well. The B coaches and the GE grant really helped us build capacity in terms of science education in our schools. And I really want to just give a shout out to our Beast coaches. They really did an amazing job with that, having supported 19 schools with 2 to 3 years of very intensive science coaching using high quality instructional materials. So I think of this as there's a specific role in building the capacity of teachers. And then it was also complemented by other investments around building high quality, ensuring that there was K0 to 8th grade science curriculum for all schools. And so we had some complementary funding of nearly $2 million as well to make sure that there was the coaching support, but also the materials to support. And there was also, I think, over $400,000 worth of professional development for teachers on top of the coaching, and a lot of engagement with families around STEAM sort of activities. So a number of different kinds of things, also including libraries. So I want to just highlight that not only was that investment a good one for runway, but it was also complemented with other investments that really resulted in some good results for us, as I think we've seen in our MCAS data. And so I think it positions us well to move forward, and those expert coaches can also be part of teaching, and students can directly benefit from them moving forward.
All right, so I guess I don't understand. So is there funding within the science department budget, or what kind of funding is there available to continue these kinds of services? Or is it now incorporated into the general budget, but that this kind of activity or whatever it needs to, morph into will be continue to be supported?
We do have program directors in our STEM team who will continue to do this work. Now, obviously, it isn't in the same intensive ways as the grant delineated, but I think what we're saying is that they were able to build some capacity within the schools that lives within the schools.
Okay.
And also, program directors will continue to support the implementation of high quality instructional materials, the use of them, as well as the pedagogical or the instructional supports.
Okay. No, I mean, I know over the years, BPS puts in resources and then pulls them back and then changes things, and our outcomes zigzag. And I particularly think now, particularly as our 6th graders are being, tasked to take the MAP test with science as one of their requirements for exam schools, et cetera, wanting to make sure that all of our elementary schools, have good, strong science background, and, knowing that we have not only the O'Brien, but also the Dearborn STEM Academy and other programs, and making sure our kids are getting good, consistent, early science instruction, so that next year's science fair can have 200 applicants in it, not just the 78 there, that, that we are a good city with lots of good STEM opportunities. Glad to see the investment, but really wanting to make sure we will hold on and deepen that particular investment moving forward. I didn't know whether Dr. Miller wanted to say something. Yeah.
Sure. I was going to jump in on the B's coaches and the science work, but I think that Dr. Chen really covered that. The only other thing I'd say is in relation to MassCore. So we're looking at graduation requirements but also really thinking about the work that we need to do with schools to ensure that this upcoming 10th grade class has access to all the classes that they need to graduate with the outlined Mass Core requirements. We've had our program directors really recently start doing some work with schools. So you'll have a program director from every content area come together and meet with a particular school team, the guidance counselor, the school leader, and they go through all of the courses that are offered. They walk through the FTE. We've only done that in 3 schools, but it's proved to be a really, really fruitful exercise. So whereas we were just offering that to some schools, that's something that we're going to offer to all schools so that we can walk through every individual school's outline in terms of what they have offered for Mass Core requirements to make sure that they have the FTE that they need, that they can meet the needs of the Mass Core requirement. So we're in the process of doing that now.
Great. Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for right now, but I know that there were a couple of members. Mr. O'Neill had an additional question he wanted to ask. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Bloom, in your presentation, as well as the presentation of several of your colleagues, you had, and it was helpful on the right-hand side, ESSER carry forward, which I understood to be, here's what we're spending some leftover ESSER funds on this year. Did I interpret that correctly? So these are items that were still remaining under ESSER spending, but which is obviously going to be running out this year.
Yes, I'm just going to ask you to clarify your definition of this year.
And this year coming up, I'm sorry, in the proposed budget, right? Okay. So with that in mind, a couple of, and I'm just going to highlight 2 things that were mentioned in those categories, but it struck me as fairly important programs. And so it may just be a small piece of it. You could help me out with that, or maybe next year we're going to find out how to move them into general funds. But when I see $1.1 million on early college, and I didn't catch the amount, but the BAM partnership becoming a MAN partnership, you know, these are critical programs for us, right? And particularly, you know, just last week at school committee, we were talking about early college as one of the 3 key components of the plan going to the state for accountability. So help me out with that. Is it just using up some funds, but there's still general fund?
Yeah, I think it is that. So it's our goal here is how do we spend every last dollar of ESSER?
Absolutely.
And make sure we don't return any money, while also not going over budget this year, right? And so sort of naturally with a $400 million funding source, if we spend 99% of the money before the end of this fiscal year, we'll have $4 million left over. And chances are we'll have a little bit more than that, right? So what we do then have is a period of time through September 30th, 2024 into the beginning of next year to encumber funds.
Yep.
And then we actually have a period of 3 months then to spend those funds, or potentially we can get an extension. We can apply for an extension of up to 18 months to actually expend those funds if the encumbrance is in. And so what we've done is identified certain things that we use ESSER money for that we do want to continue, that we can use up our sort of last bit of ESSER by buying that service within the time frame that's allowed, right? So we can pay for BAM for next year inside the time threshold that's allowed, for example. And then we can work with our partners at the state to make sure that that then transitions to our FY26 budget. So we've actually sort of, it's basically a 3-year transition process. So last year in our budget, we outlined several ways we were moving things off of ESSER onto the general fund to start that transition away from ESSER. This year, obviously, is the majority of the work as ESSER's coming to a close. But because we have this little sort of tail end of ESSER going into next year, we're able to sort of do one more year of transition. And what that's allowed us to do is invest really deeply in inclusive practices this year for FY25. Sorry, I did the exact same this year, Mr. O'Neill.
Yeah.
we can invest so deeply in inclusion and inclusive practices for next year because in part we do have this tail end of ESSER, and we're able to keep certain things ongoing with that tail end.
Okay, but I should not imply from seeing things on the right side of those slides that it would be under ESSER, what was the carry forward, that those are not programs that will not have funding going forward.
Right. We will come back to you to talk about those programs at this time next year. Either if we are deciding to cut them for whatever reason, we'll bring them forward and explain why we've decided that. Or if we're continuing to invest in them, they'll be a part of our investment to general fund next year.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Superintendent, looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes, clearly the secondary work, in particular early college and the career connections, is going to be long-standing work and an investment area for the district. I think to David's point, we're utilizing whatever we can right now so that there's other things that we can also invest in with the new dollars that we have. But going forward, I think the committee can surely expect to see the secondary work continue.
Gotcha. I just didn't want conclusions to be drawn by something being listed under ESSER carry forward. So I really want to clarify that and make sure that my assumption was as Mr. Bloom just explained. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's it for me.
Thank you. Okay. Oops. So I'm just all right. Okay. See, Ms. Polanco Garcia has her hand raised again.
Yes. Yo quiero, gracias, Madam Chair. Yo quiero preguntar con relación a los feedback. Cuando navegamos en la página de BPS Budget, hay una parte que dice que puedes enviar feedback sobre el presupuesto.
Yes, I am asking regarding the BPS webpage itself. There is a part that says that actually we can provide feedback regarding the budget itself.
Entonces, ¿cómo están ustedes asegurando que todas las familias de BPS puedan entender cómo pueden hacer ese proceso con sus particulares escuelas? Y quién maneja esa información y cómo pueden la familia ver qué están, si esto es público, si la familia pueden verlo. Quisiera saber más cómo manejan ese feedback.
How is it, I would like to understand better, how is it that the families are, or you guys are in a better position to understand how the families are managing this, and what kind of tools do the families know to be able to know that they are doing actually the right thing? And how do you guys manage that type of feedback to make sure that everybody has access to it? What tools do you have at your disposal to make sure that that is allocated appropriately?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think, first of all, appreciate the question, Member Polanco Garcia. Part of the budget process is it's a lengthy process that at the schools, the school site councils and the school leaders talk deeply with their community. And so a big piece of that is engaging family as part of the school site council, as part of parent council around the budget. So some of that feedback comes in the form of dialogue with principals as they represent what the interests or the concerns may be, or the questions. And then there's the ability to also give the feedback, which then on a daily basis gets monitored if questions are coming in through the website as well. So there should be lots of opportunities for families if they have questions about the budget, first their local school and the structures there, and then from the central office, sometimes we field things through the help desk and the hotline, and sometimes through the website. So really, we're trying to give as many kinds of ways for families and parents to give the feedback and then to answer in that way. And Dr. Tavares, I don't know if there's or Chief Sanchez, if there's anything else specific you want to talk about family involvement.
Superintendent, I think you captured the most important part of the families and schools really being the decision-making bodies, with mentioning the school site council and the parent council. And, you know, with school committee member Polanco Garcia, I know that this is something that's very close to the work that you lead and is critically important. How we have our families that have their first language other than English also participate in those bodies that the superintendent mentioned, and how critical it is, you know, this whole conversation of having bilingual staff and bilingual educators to support their participation. So that's something that I just wanted to uplift also by language. So exactly what the superintendent shared, but then also acknowledging that we're always working on making sure there's access by language. And Chief Sanchez, did you want to add any other extra detail?
Yeah, I think in terms of the language, it's also really critical to share that as part of the school site councils, we also offer translation and interpretation for our families as well. So that way they are able to not just participate, but also feel extremely welcomed within the languages that they speak.
And we also, from a communication standpoint, we've added into the family newsletters information about the budget at each step.
Thank you.
Dr. Alkins?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Chair Robinson, for sort of bringing this up, because this is something I thought about as I looked at the budget, and just sort of particularly looking at the general fund, well, all the spreadsheets, but then particularly at our STEM lines, and just seeing sort of the reductions in each of those. I mean, STEM has like some increases, but just could somebody kind of walk me through that, just as an investment, as to like as to why those are particularly, you know, we're cutting those, we're cutting in those particular areas within our general education departments?
So I think either Dr. Chen or Dr. Miller would be best positioned specific to that question, Dr. Elkins. I will say that one of the other pieces that is, now that we've gone secondary 7-12, there's exciting opportunity in that 7th, 8th, 9th grade in a way that didn't exist before, because of MassCore, but even more so because of alignment with early college offerings, and also alignment with some of the career pathways to integrate STEM in at almost every step. So I think some of that you'll see relative that you won't necessarily see in this particular budget item, but what you will see is in the high schools, the offerings are sort of exploding. So whether that's in the health sciences, the biosciences, and life sciences, it really kind of cuts across. And I, coming from the secondary world, am really excited about that, because it's the applied learning of STEM that the kids really take and remember.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's what I was getting. I was trying to see the connection, particularly to career paths. And like, okay, so that's helpful.
Are there any more questions right now? Okay. If not, thank you for the presentation. And I want to remind everyone that you can view all of the budget documents and share your feedback by visiting bostonpublicschools.org/budget. You can also email your comments to the school committee. Our final budget hearing will take place on Wednesday, March 20th at 5 p.m., followed by a school committee meeting at 6 p.m. The committee will vote on the superintendent's final fiscal year 25 budget recommendation on March 27th. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, first of all, I want to say thank you to you very much, and for everything that you've done for us, and for the very last time, officially, will you call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Dr. Alkins.
Yes, thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Mr. Cardet Hernandez. Ms. Lima Barbosa.
Yes, thank you, Liz, again.
Thank you. Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Yes, thank you, Liz.
Gracias. Mr. Tran.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, and thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson.
Yes, and again, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's unanimous. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Thank you for your 16 years.
Thank you.
Liz.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Liz. Thank
Bye,
you.
Liz.
Liz.